Okay. When the sanctions against Iran were announced yesterday, I was remembering some women who came from Iran and lived in North Vancouver. And we were part of an intercultural group at my last church. It was during the sanctions of 2014. It was hurting them and causing insecurity. Week by week, they didn't know if their family situations would mean that they had to go home. But they were afraid to go home because it was so unsettled. Now, I don't know the politics of the decision around sanctions. But I remember their personal stories. They were strangers in a strange land, and something significant was happening back home in Iran that affected their families, their finances, and their sense of security and well-being. Last week, we left Moses, who would become the leader of the Israelite people as they escaped from slavery. We left him feeling like we left him in exile, actually, where he had run away because of a youthful mistake, a hot-headed mistake. And he was rebuilding his life in this strange land. He had a family. He seemed to be fitting in. But do you ever really fit in when you're escaping from home? Do you ever find that place of peace? Maybe. Some people do. But I wonder if Moses did. Henry Nouwen, a number of years ago, wrote a book called The Wounded Healer. And he said this: human withdrawal is a very painful and lonely process because it forces us to face directly our own condition in all of its beauty as well as its misery. Moses was a stranger in human withdrawal as he fled his homeland. And perhaps it was a lonely process for him, regardless of the new family he had established. Because when we get to our story today, it is that beautiful story of the burning bush that burns and is never devoured. And it gets Moses' attention. I wonder if he was looking for some kind of sign from God. If in his unsettledness. He was paying attention to signs, to the everyday events of his life. I remember when we met weekly with the group of women from Iran, and it was an intercultural group. Every week we would talk because they looked for signs. What should they do? Should they go home? Should they try to leave permanently? They were constantly reading the newspapers, listening to their relatives back home, trying to find the path that would be safe, knowing that whatever happened for them might not happen for their extended family. That's what's given me this sense of Moses looking. And so the passage that Colin says, Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight. He's willing to stop in the midst of taking his father-in-law's flocks, and he stops, he looks, and he ponders. What might this mean? And as he ponders that, he feels like he hears a voice, a call. And he says, here I am. So Moses knows at that moment that he's not finished with his homeland and God isn't finished with him. And so he will return to Egypt, where he's a wanted man. But he goes now with a resolve and with a call. And with, although he doesn't know how it's going to turn out, he goes with a certainty that this is the path he's supposed to go. Henri Nouwen said that that the wounded healer becomes the wounded leader because they understand that there's nothing in human experience that is foreign to them. There's no experience, no thought, no feeling that human beings have that is alien to them. They are grounded. A person who has been wounded and healed is grounded in knowing the fragility and the vulnerability of life, and has the capacity to be compassionate rather than judgmental in dealing with other people. So after our reading today, Moses is going to go back to Egypt. That's what it says about Moses, this openness, this searching. I think we need to be clear that we get the picture of what this also says about God. What does this story mean for us as we seek to discern who is this God that we say we follow, whose stories we read, whose call we heed. Well, I want to suggest three things. God is persistent. God didn't let Moses run away and hide forever. God persisted in saying, Moses, I have a job for you. One that because you have now been an exile, a foreigner in a strange land, you now understand better the human plight. And I have a job for you. God is persistent. God also gives second chances. This is a hard one for us because with our long memories, we often think that once we know somebody has made even a youthful mistake, we continue to bring it up. We remember it. God gives second chances. Will we? Do we? Is there a way in which the story of Moses going home will not be the story of a youth who murdered an Egyptian, but it will become the story of someone who has been tried and tested by the fires of exile and now comes home and comes to lead the people to freedom. Will people accept his leadership? Henri Nouwen says that God often calls the wounded people to be leaders. He said the great illusion of leadership is to think that a person can be led out of the desert by someone who has never been there. I don't know what this story means in your life. It may be that you're a person who has been given a second chance, who needs a second chance. It may be that you've never really done anything wrong. Whatever the circumstances, I was thinking about the church. You know, there's lots of people who kind of are annoyed with the church because the church has made mistakes. And we kind of get timid because we know we've made mistakes. But if the Moses story tells us anything, it is that mistakes do not end our capacity to practice faithful leadership. Mistakes do not silence us. We need to learn from them and then hear the call for what is unique to us and move on with it. in this day and age, when there's so much kind of groaning in our communities and our culture, I think there's never been a more important time for the church to hear the story of Moses and to step out and to say, we have some stories that we think you need to hear. We have love to share. We have healing to offer. And yes, we've made mistakes, but we've learned from them. And our call is still to be a place of community, of communion. Well, I think you get the point. Next week, we're going to jump to Moses leading the people into freedom. It's a great story. You might want this week to read some of the intervening verses. Well, thanks for listening. Remember to keep looking for our call, and remember to give people a second chance. Amen.